Welcome to 20th Century Music and Arts. On tonight's episode, we are going to continue our series on 70s horror films. We're going to look at two more films by Bob Clark and two other films from the 70s with some truly demented concepts. In the first episode of this series, we looked at the film Death Dream. This classic was actually the second film that Bob Clark had directed. After directing two low-budget films, The Emperor's New Clothes and She-Man in the mid-60s, Clark would go on to Florida with actor and co-writer Alan Ormsby to create the humorous horror film Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. This film is a true grindhouse classic. The film is about a sadistic movie director called Alan, played by Alan Ormsby, who takes a group of actors to an island off of the coast of Florida in order to engage in a satanic ritual. He is a tyrant who orders the actors about and sexually harasses the female members of the troupe. When he gets them to dig up a corpse, one of them corpses comes to life, while another appears in the woods and grabs one of the actresses. It is soon apparent, after the one in the grave gets punched in the face and complains, that these two ghouls are in fact actors that Alan has hired to play a practical joke. Alan does get his hands on a corpse he calls Orville and performs the satanic ritual. He then takes the corpse back to the cottage they are staying at and uses him for his own amusement. Every time the actors complain, he threatens to fire them. But it soon becomes apparent that the ritual he did worked, and soon everybody is trying to fight back the hordes of zombies trying to get into the cottage, a la Night of the Living Dead. This low-budget classic has that 70s schlock feel, and it really works here because it has a great balance of both horror exploitation and humor.
Paul, see if you can put some life into the party.
Which party are you referring to?
Down, Jeff. Okay, Big P, let's get the show on the road. What's the matter, big fella? Cat dower got your tongue? What a bunch of stiffs, eh, Orv? Well, that's all right. Just keep a stiff upper lip. Keep a stiff upper lip. Orville's my straight man. All right, pretty boy. You do it. I can't think of anything funny to say.
That's because it's not funny. It's disgusting.
Disgusting. Do I, disgust you, Miss, seducible brownie? Why, this is just good, clean fun.
After filming Death Dream, later in 1972, Clark went up to Canada to film his next film, Black Christmas. Clark had been using Canada as a tax shelter and a home base. He was able to get an ensemble cast with Olivia Hussey, Keir Dullea, Margot Kidder, John Saxon, and Andrea Martin. Black Christmas is an absolute masterpiece. It would lay the groundwork for where the slasher genre would go during the boom of the late 70s and early 80s. It was filmed in my hometown of Toronto at both an old house and at the University of Toronto campus. The film was released on October 11th, 1974 in Toronto and on December 20th in the US. The film is about a deranged psychopath who enters a girls' sorority house while a party is going on. He climbs up the side of the house and hides in an attic, where he's able to kill members of the house, but then also call them on the phone using the most obscene taunts. The killer seems to be engaged in a kind of strange dialogue that often sounds like a child being abused by a mother. The first of his victims, Claire, is suffocated and wrapped in a plastic dry cleaning bag and then is stored in the attic. Soon Claire's father arrives at the sorority house looking for his daughter, but he has to deal with the various characters in the home. There is the alcoholic sorority house mother, Mrs. McHenry, who hides sherry bottles in books. There is the crude and raunchy Barb, played by Margot Kidder, who at one point tricks a dim-witted police officer into writing down the scientific term for oral sex, and later gets really drunk and talks about sexual escapades in front of Mr. Harrison, Claire's father. There is the nerdy Phil, played by Andrea Martin, and then there's Jess, played by Olivia Hussey, who is dating the angsty musician Peter, who's played by Keir Dullea. He has decided to leave the conservatory and suggests to Jess that they get married. Jess refuses the offer and then tells Peter that she is in fact pregnant and wants to get an abortion. This news shocks Peter and leads him to performing terribly in front of his professors later that day. The girls keep receiving obscene phone calls, and after much badgering to the police finally take interest in the missing Claire. A 13-year-old girl in the neighborhood is also missing. Lieutenant Fuller, who is played by John Saxon, gathers together a search party involving members of the community. Unfortunately, the 13-year-old girl's body is found, but there is no Claire, who actually is in the attic, along with Mrs. McHenry, who earlier got a hook to the head. Peter shows up to talk to Jess at the house, and more girls start disappearing. Suspicion points to Peter, but we as the audience know that there is a killer in the attic. The obscene phone calls are getting traced by the police, but the killer does not stay on the line long enough to get caught, but eventually does. Before the movie When a Stranger Calls, this was the first movie to use the line, "The call is coming from inside the house." Black Christmas is so well filmed and has aged very well. The dialogue by the killer, played by Nick Mancuso, is truly twisted, disturbing, and multi-dimensional. It's as if the killer is recalling horrific moments from his childhood. The film's climax is quite original, and the camera work really highlights the killer's point of view. The film is the link between the Italian Giallo films and the 80s slasher films, and it hinted at where the genre would go with the revolution that was created by Halloween. Black Christmas was in fact an inspiration for the John Carpenter film. The film was inspired by the urban legend of a killer calling a babysitter and phoning from the house, along with a real-life series of murders that happened in Montreal in 1943, where a 14-year-old boy bludgeoned several of his family members to death. The film was also banned from a television viewing under the name Stranger in the House in 1978 because 2 girls had been murdered 2 weeks earlier at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. The killer was later identified as Ted Bundy. The film was remade in both 2006 and 2019, and an unofficial sequel was released on YouTube and Vimeo called It's Me, Billy. Apparently, It's Me, Billy 2 will have Olivia Hussey and Linda Griffith in it. It is a film that is on numerous top horror movie lists and was the third highest grossing Canadian movie of all time, and is a favorite of comedian Steve Martin, who has viewed it 27 times. We are now going to look at 2 films with some truly demented concepts. The Baby from 1973 is a truly shocking movie. It was directed by Ted Boast, who had directed Hang 'em High, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and Magnum Force, and it was released theatrically in March 1973. The film is about the overbearing matriarch, Mrs. Wadsworth, played by Ruth Roman, who has a 21-year-old son who has stayed in an arrested state of development and still acts and behaves like a toddler. He is simply known as Baby, and he's played by David Manzi. Mrs. Wadsworth has 2 other daughters, Germaine, who's played by Marianne Hill, you might remember her from Messiah of Evil, and Alba, who's played by Suzanne Zenner. They are both from different men, and so is Baby, and apparently left shortly after he was born. Anne Gentry, who's played by Anjanette Cormier, managed to get herself assigned as a social worker to Baby. Anne shows up at the house often and suspects that Baby is being kept in this arrested state of development by the mother and the two sisters, who are very secretive in their behavior. Anne herself is a tragic figure whose architect husband was in some kind of accident, and now she lives with her mother-in-law and watches old slideshows of her husband. As Anne becomes obsessed with the case, she can see that Baby can actually maybe do more physically, but is afraid to do so. And his current stage of development is probably just a manifestation of his mother's misandry. The audience sees that Baby gets punished by beatings and even in one scene by electric shocks for not acting like a toddler. When the mother and the daughters catch a babysitter doing something very inappropriate with Baby, they beat her mercilessly. But soon Anne and Mrs. Wadsworth come into direct conflict, and eventually everything will go down at the birthday party Mrs. Wadsworth will have for Baby. But is Anne's intention and concern for Baby pure? Or is there another motivation? The Baby is a unique film that has all the great elements of 70s grindhouse films. There is a smorgasbord of violence and sleazy elements throughout this film, and it has one of the most twisted endings I've ever seen in a movie. I cannot recommend The Baby enough.
Hey, baby. Hey. Yes, it must get lonely in there all by yourself. I bet you'd like a playmate, wouldn't you? Yes, you would. Let me be your playmate. Yes, thank you. Yes. Let's try something more grown-up today, okay? You're a bright fellow. Anybody can see that. You want to try to stand up? Yeah. Want to stand up? Want to try? Give me your hands. Give me your hands. That's my boy. That's my boy. Up we go. Okay, hold on. Come on, let's try. That's right. That's great. Oopsie, Jay. But that was good. Yeah, and it was fun, wasn't it? Yeah. Let's try it again. Let's try. You just trust me. I won't let you fall. Let's go. Up you go. That's right. Hold on to me.
Mrs. Gentry, just what do you think you're doing?
Another film that is truly demented in its concept is Mansion of the Doom. Now, this film is not for the squeamish, especially if you have a sensitivity about anything happening to the eyes. The film was directed by Michael Pataki, who in fact played the sleazy party guest Dennis in The Baby, and was released on October 1st, 1976. The film is about a surgeon, Dr. Leonard Cheney, played by Richard Basehart, whose daughter Nancy, played by Trish Stewart, gets blinded in both eyes in a car accident. He becomes obsessed with restoring her eyesight. With the help of his assistant Catherine, played by Gloria Graham, he performs an eye transplant on 2 dogs before getting other ideas. He meets up with his daughter's fiancé and ophthalmologist, Dr. Dan Bryan, who's played by Lance Hendrickson. He drugs his martini and, yes, removes the young man's eyes and sticks them into his daughter's eye sockets. It works at first, but soon the daughter goes blind again. So Cheney picks up hitchhikers, hires a caregiver and a real estate agent, and all of them get drugged and have their eyes removed. The key here is never to drink any wine that he offers you. One woman whose husband is a U.S. Marshal does not get a job offer or the wine. But none of the victims are dead, but rather are kept in an electrified cage in the basement. The image of all these eyeless people crammed together is beyond disturbing. Dr. Bryan tries to figure a way out to escape by digging a hole in the wall. Now, Dr. Cheney really pushes it when he tries to kidnap a young girl who manages to escape from the car. And then Dr. Cheney ends up crashing into a couple of rednecks, one played by Major League Baseball player Al Ferrara, who then chase him back to his place. Cheney offers them a big bribe for the car accident and some wine. So they end up in the cage too. After one of the female victims dies, his assistant Catherine suggests that they kill the victim. However, Cheney wants to restore their eyesight after the process is successful on his daughter. 2 women escape. One gets caught by Cheney and the other gets run over by a car, which really causes a problem. After Detective Simon, played by Vic Tayback, you might remember him as Mel, the cook on Alice, sees the victim has had their eyes removed. He interviews Chaney about how this could happen. Simon was luckily on duty and could not drink the wine Chaney offers him. Things are closing in on Chaney as fellow doctors are wondering where Brian is and why Dr. Brian was never contacted by his daughter. This film has a brutal ending and is a truly a unique exploitation film with a very complex but morally twisted protagonist. The film was in fact seized under Section 3 of the Obscene Publication Acts in the UK during the video nasties panic in the early 1980s. I cannot recommend this twisted film enough.
Shh, quiet, quiet, quiet.
Thank you for watching 20th Century Music and Arts. On the next episode, I will look at another 4 great horror movies from the 70s. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Have you seen any of the films in this episode? If so, what did you think of them? Thank you. See you next episode.